If you hold or have been thinking about buying XRP, Bitcoin, Stellar Lumens, XLM, HBAR, or Hedera Hashgraph, and Dogecoin, then you need to watch this video and pay close attention, because this may very well be your last chance to accumulate these cryptos at these current prices before we experience a face-melting bull run into 2025 year end and 2026. And yes, I do believe we are still in a major bull market, even though it's been lagging relative to previous bull markets and their 4-year cycle. This may be just a 6-year mega cycle, which is a deviation from what we've typically experienced. But with the type of price action that we've seen in recent months, for example, in May, we typically like to sell and look away because the market really struggles through the summer. But this has been one of the strongest recorded Mays in recent history, which leads me to believe that we are going to see some insane new all-time highs on virtually all of the cryptos, and especially the ones mentioned on this video, into the end of the year. And that's right off the back of the fact that Trump and his economic policies have been creating a lot of uncertainty in the markets. And yes, the stock market sold off pretty hard the other day. So did the crypto market. However, this is not the end, in my opinion, and I'll explain why on the charts. And virtually all of the news surrounding the current situation and environment we're in is relatively bearish and negative. And yes, the stock market or traditional finance does affect the crypto market, because at the end of the day, market participants across the board, whether they're institutional or retail, pay attention to the news. And if it's very negative news, they don't like holding through times of uncertainty, so they sell, whether it's crypto or stocks. And so there's a lot of freaking articles and news all over social media where they're talking about how the economy is terrible and how tariffs are terrible and how things are really bad. But at the end of the day, none of that is actually showing up on the charts. And for example, we have one article right here that says the economy is limping. And when you scroll down, you can see that actually, when it comes to data directly from the Federal Reserve, we see extremely slow growth in many states. Then in other states, we see no growth. And then we see a contraction in growth all through the entire West. And many people are using this data among the bond markets in order to say that a recession is right around the corner. You have many banks putting out reports saying that the recession odds have increased from 50% to 60%, sometimes even 70%. And this is coming from people like Goldman Sachs. In other words, some of these states are actually already experiencing a recession because GDP is going down. But for whatever reason, the crypto market is still looking strong, even if the cryptos that we mentioned are lagging behind Bitcoin a bit. So we're going to dive into the charts as well as some on-chain analytics to show you what's actually happening and some key price points and pivots into potential price targets, so you understand what's really going on and how to better manage your portfolio. And really quickly, before we begin and dive into the charts, you haven't had the opportunity, head on over to Bull Runners HQ on Twitter or X, and be sure to follow our account, which is our official account, where every single week we are running a giveaway of $100 worth of XRP. And all you need to do is go to the pinned post, make sure it's the pinned post right here, and like the post, comment XRP below, and subscribe to the newsletter. We pick one winner at random. And yes, we do verify that they've done all of these steps. So even though we see 160 likes, that does not mean everyone's actually followed through with the steps. So it's extremely important that you actually follow the steps in this pin post in order to be considered to win. And with that said, as always, if you're feeling blessed and bullish, comment 777. And if you're going to be the wealthiest person in your family tree, smash the subscribe button. Hello and welcome back to the channel, my friend. If you're new here, my name is Paul, and you can find me on Twitter or X at PauliDefi, PAULIEDEFI. And what we're going to do is dive into the actual charts and do some technical analysis, talk about price targets, pivot points, areas at which I'm going to be accumulating and entering if we see any levels of volatility. And I'm also just going to do it in order by market cap. Again, market cap is basically the total amount of value or money in any one crypto. Bitcoin is by far the largest, and in other words, it is the mothership. If Bitcoin ain't doing well, I would argue, and let's just say it's a bear market, then virtually everything else is going to suffer as well. Bitcoin is sitting at $2.1 trillion and the second biggest crypto by market cap in the list that we're covering is XRP at $136 billion. In other words, the market cap on Bitcoin is 20 times larger than that of XRP, and XRP is far larger than everything else. And typically the way I like to think about this is the market has already chosen some major winners, and those winners are basically anything that has at least $1 billion market cap. But really, when it comes to the valuations of these cryptos or even companies like XRP with Ripple has won the race relative to many other cryptos, and so it's going to have less room to grow because it's a lot harder to push the price up of this asset, or better yet, even Bitcoin relative to XRP, because there's already so much money in it. So yes, the opportunity might be greater when it comes to earning multiples on something like Hedera or XLM. However, it's important to note that a lot of the times the market has already priced this in. So the people with the money have already done a lot of homework and research, and they've bought into these cryptos. So it's not like we're all early on every single one of these. Now, relatively speaking, crypto as a whole market, yes, we're still early. But when you see a market cap like this means at current day, it's fairly valued. Now, in the future, this could easily triple, quadruple, 10x even. But what I'm simply trying to say is the larger the market cap, the more that the market itself has decided that this is the winner that we've decided to put our money behind. So we also have to be relatively realistic, because at the end of the day, if we're just buying into hopium and dreams and a bunch of fundamentals or news without being serious about the reality of the actual price of the token, then we might actually hurt ourselves or harm ourselves by going all in on one thing, when in reality we should practice a bit of diversification. And I get it's no fun to be realistic in markets, because we're here to make money, we're here to have fun, we're here to believe in something. Many of us believe in crypto, in blockchain, but I also want to be realistic. So without further ado, let's dive into the price action on Bitcoin. So the first thing I want to do is get an overall view of the market, and the way that I do this is typically by zooming out. In other words, when in doubt, zoom out. And I'm currently on a 3-day time frame because it gives us plenty of data. We can see that the bottom came in here sometime in November of 2022, and basically we started breaking out into January of 2023. We've already been in a bull market. The question is, will this thing continue? And so I typically do this in order to then make decisions with this is kind of like my 30,000 foot view. Are we in an uptrend? And the answer is yes, because the actual low came in right here in January of 2023. Since that point in time, we've been putting in a series of what? Higher highs and higher lows. In other words, this is a textbook uptrend, and this was our major low right here, coming in at 74,300, which actually touched the prior high. In other words, what used to be a resistance becomes a support. Since this point in time, we broke for a new high and put in a higher low. This high is higher than this high. These lows are higher than these lows, are higher than these lows. So the answer is yes, we are currently still trending up. We are in a long-term uptrend, which leads me to believe that if we are, then everything on a dip when it comes to our favorite cryptos, we should be accumulating. The question is when. We're also going to look at relative strength between all of the cryptos that we mentioned to just show you how I'm currently allocating my portfolio if I'm investing in any of these cryptos, or if you've been thinking about picking up any of the cryptos that I mentioned or holding them, then what's actually relatively strong? Where is the best performer in the race? Which one is most likely to win that Kentucky Derby? I like to bet on the dark horse in the race, because 9 times out of 10, even though it might look expensive, what's expensive now might be extremely expensive in the future. I don't typically like to buy laggards or underperformers, but it's underperforming because the majority of good investors, I should say, don't see the same value. So their money's never going to enter it relative to the ones that they're already entering into. So chase the leaders, not the laggards. Now that said, let me come into this daily time frame and go ahead and look at this thing. As you can see, we did put in a new all-time high, and we actually closed well above that prior all-time high. And again, again, when we see something like this, what used to be a what? Resistance right over here becomes a support. Not only did we break up for a new all-time high, even with that breakdown and the uncertainty the other day with the 50% Trump tariffs on the EU, we only broke right back down to our prior all-time highs and are currently seeing a level of support here. Now, this might come down a little bit lower, but what leads me to believe that we're actually going to go far higher is the fact that even on that sell pressure in day, the volume was actually relatively weak. You can see it was below our major buys. So we're actually just seeing increased buying to the upside. This is further confirmed by the fact that when you come over to crypto quant, you go to charts, you come to Bitcoin, you look at the exchange flows right here and the exchange reserves. And let me go ahead and just pull this up right now, that we are seeing less and less available Bitcoin on reserves, even into these new all-time highs, which leads me to believe that Bitcoin is not only being bought on exchanges, but removed from exchanges, which will create a supply crunch. And whenever you have the same level of demand, not even increased demand, although I do expect demand to increase, but let's say the same level of demand and the supply is going lower and lower and lower, the price by default has to go up to meet that demand. So that said, this thing has consistently been declining since it hit all-time highs right back here. And actually, if I zoom out even further, you can see that it's been in one of its craziest downtrends in history, going all the way back to the prior all-time high in 2024 in March. So this thing has consistently been being accumulated by major institutional investors who see the price of Bitcoin being far higher than it is right now, which leads me to believe that yes, we're in a bull market. If we were in a bear market, we'd start to see this purple line trend to the upside because they're depositing onto exchanges in order to sell because they are happy with the current price. Right now, they believe the price is going to continue going up, which is why this trend is so strong to the downside and the price is so strong to the upside. So with this type of price action in May, with this type of buy volume consistently increasing to the upside and actually an explosion of volume on the actual breakout right here, this leads me to believe that yes, this is a very strong trend. Yes, we are going to continue climbing up. Then if I go ahead and toss a 10 and 20 EMA on there, you can see we've perfectly touched back down and have been trading on the daily time frame at that 10 EMA, which is the blue line, and that is over the 20 EMA, which is the orange line. Consistently, this is just very bullish, even with all of the macroeconomic negative news. And even though the stock market has not been performing as well, Bitcoin and crypto are seriously outperforming now, which takes me into that second altcoin, which is XRP. Now, XRP has severely been lagging Bitcoin, and we know this to be true simply because the price action, although it has been now bullish coming in from that bottom in April 8th, it is nowhere near its prior all-time high at $3.40 right over here. As you can see, volume has consistently been what? Declining. And we know this to be true because I have a 90-day average, which is this line right here that is now blue and consistently blue. So yes, we got in a little explosion in growth of volume by volume right around here on May 12th of 2025. And when we look at that, that was actually the local high. But generally speaking, volume is down, and that is totally fine. Volume can actually remain down all the way up into this new high right here, or the prior high at $3.40, as long as the trend continues to the upside. And right now, the trend really is our friend in XRP. Although it's lagging behind Bitcoin, I expect it to catch up to Bitcoin at some point here in the near future. You can see that right here, we have a consistent support. What used to be a resistance here becomes a support, and it was a support back here in March, and again right back here in February, and again right back here in January. So XRP is just testing these ranges quite a bit and building up a lot of strength before an explosive move to the upside. And I actually like XRP at the current price all the way down to 215. So in these ranges, we're actually really healthy. Now, when I pull up a VRVP, what's interesting on XRP is even if I zoom out, you can see the majority of volume, and the VRVP I'm not going to explain right now. I explain this in Altcoin Pro University, which I'll cover here in a second, is simply a really powerful volume tool that shows up on the right hand side. It shows you where the majority of volume on price has been traded in this visible range, which again, I can explain at some other time if you're a member at Altcoin Pro University. But that said, we have a boatload of volume that traded at the $2.40 to $2.45 range. In other words, this is our major point of interest. And if XRP holds the support right here and follows the trend on Bitcoin, and by the way, yes, the trend is now up. We have an intermediate term uptrend and a long-term uptrend. Then guess what? A break above here is likely going to take us to at least $3 and highly likely to be that prior all-time high. Even if volume is consistently declining, as long as we get a new explosion of volume into a breakout above 340 at some point in the near future, or I would even argue sometime in the upcoming months, things are going to be looking really good. So yes, I think if we're not accumulating XRP at these prices and we're very happy with the fundamentals of XRP, if you're a major fan of XRP, right now is the time to be accumulating anywhere into the current range and down to like 220, 215, because this would still be a technical uptrend in a longer term uptrend, and buying right now would still give you into that prior all-time high another 45 to 46% into a new all-time high. I could easily see this thing hitting a $500 billion market cap, which is a 4 to 5x from here. I would say about 4 point some x from here. In other words, I could easily see XRP hitting at least $10 and potentially even like $13 this bull market cycle on a massive move to the upside. But still, it's important to be realistic and take profits along the way, and that's totally up to you, whether you want to do a psychological resistance, whether you want to do Fibonacci stuff, you name it. Now, speaking of resistances and when to take profit, if you haven't already, go ahead and check out Altcoin Pro University. We have a link down in the description or in the pinned comment below for altcoinpro.com. And in this university, every single week, we offer a boatload of live classes, and this upcoming Tuesday on the 27th, so if you're watching this after the fact, every single Tuesday, I host a live technical analysis call where I teach people everything they need to know about diving into the charts bit by bit by bit, how to understand indicators, when to use a proper indicator, how not to use these indicators, how to use a Fibonacci tool, how to come up with price targets, and this week I'm actually covering stop losses and take profits. So if that sounds interesting to you and you want to be involved and you want to be live and asking questions, this is a very different dynamic than these videos, then go ahead and get started with Altcoin Pro University. And what's so beautiful is that every single week we offer through our professional DeFi researchers and analysts a DeFi yield quick win, which shows you exactly how to basically take your crypto that you're already sitting on and to put it to work for you so you can earn interest and pay for the course and the membership itself. We have many students that are already taking advantage of these DeFi yield quick wins. We offer all sorts of cool bonuses and offer rewards for simply doing it and showing us that you did it. People win actual money on the back end through our raffles. However, we have students that have put in between $1,200 to $5,000, and that pays for the entire membership itself at $97 a month. In other words, everything is smooth sailing and riding, and we offer all sorts of courses and classes and live calls, DeFi yield picks, altcoin picks, airdrop alerts, everything you need to be a crypto pro in one single place. In other words, you really have nothing to lose and everything to gain. And if we can't help you to get your money back within 14 days, literally just ask for it back. Or if this thing's not for you and you check it out and you're like, I don't really like it, that's totally fine. But I can assure you this is bar none the best crypto education on planet Earth, and we stand by that. So go ahead and go to altcoinpro.com to check it out and to learn how to do technical analysis like a pro with me on a live call. Now, zooming out to something like Dogecoin, we are looking at a 3-day time frame. And as you can see, our prior all-time high came in somewhere. And again, this is not the actual all-time high. This is just the prior all-time high, December 8th of 2024 at about 48 cents. The actual all-time high came in right here at 74 cents back in 2021. Now, since this point in time, you can see that we are in a technical uptrend if this thing would stop doing that to me. And right here, we have our around major lows of the range. This would have been a great time to accumulate, but since we did not tell you about it, and maybe you've already heard about it, maybe you were buying, I'm not too sure where you're at on your crypto journey, now would be a pretty good time to accumulate Dogecoin, considering, again, we are in a strong intermediate term, and actually I would even say longer term, since October of 2023, uptrend. This thing sees some explosive growth when it breaks out for new highs, and as you can see, it happened back here in March and yet again in November of 2024. Since that point in time, we've also put in a strong uptrend from the local lows right here. If I go ahead and take a trend tool, you can see that the trend is up, and again, the trend is your friend until the bend at the end. So I thoroughly expect this thing to hit its prior all-time high of at least 74 cents, and in a strong uptrend in a bull market where everything's breaking out for new highs, especially something like Dogecoin being the #1 meme coin in the entire market, I could see this thing hitting at least that psychological resistance of $1. And if it hits $1, this is where I'll start to take profits at 74 cents and again at $1. In other words, accumulating right now at the current price of 22 cents could still give you at least a 222% gain all the way up to a 340% gain. And I think that's at minimum. If Dogecoin really starts to rally, and again, Elon Musk starts tweeting about it and all these other things start to happen in the market, a lot of money is going to rotate away from Bitcoin into these very strong performers. So generally speaking, on a longer term time frame, something like Dogecoin is looking really freaking good, especially with the volume so severely down since that local high. And I expect it to start to increase back into this high and explode above a new high above 48 cents. So things are looking really good for an accumulation. And by the way, if you're looking to wait for somewhere else to buy, although I'd be already accumulating, I wouldn't wait because it might not go back down here. It'd be somewhere in this range of like 20 cents back down to like 17 cents is where I'd love to accumulate more Dogecoin. Now, finally, let's get into the smaller cryptos by market cap, and those are none other than Stellar Lumens, XLM, and HBAR. So with XLM, it's really quite interesting. It did pump really hard in unison with XRP, and let me go ahead and get out of the way here. But since that early pump back in November of last year when XRP was pumping, this thing has severely been lagging, and lagging XRP, which by the way has been lagging Bitcoin. So this thing is severely underperforming Bitcoin, and there's no two ways about it. Many people might say, well, the fundamentals are better. It's a better blockchain. Listen, I'm not trying to get into the fundamentals on this video. I'm just trying to show you exactly what the price is telling me, what investors are actually doing, because if investors are consistently buying something, then the price is going to be driven up. But right now, Bitcoin is severely outperforming something like XLM. Does that mean it's a good opportunity to buy? Well, let me find out. The first thing I'd like to do is take a trend line tool from the highs right over here and draw it through each major high of the range. And as you can see here, we come perfectly into this high, these highs, and yet again the current high. In other words, XLM really does need to hold the current price in order to be above the range. And again, it doesn't need to be perfect. Some people could argue, you know, this is a bit of a bull trap, but at the end of the day, the major low came in right here on April 7th. In other words, if we break below this range right here, then it's highly likely we're coming back down to at least 15 cents. So if for whatever reason something happens with XLM and that price action, right, and the trend remains down like where we're at right now, we're kind of in make it or break it zone for XLM, whereas XRP has already broke above, Bitcoin's already hit new all-time highs, this guy's severely underperforming and lagging. Then if we see any major sell pressure in the crypto markets for whatever reason, let's say so the fundamentals change, let's say war breaks out in the Middle East again, I don't know, anything can happen, then my accumulation zone would 100% be between 17 cents down to like 15 cents for XLM, considering that is going to be a very strong support on something like this crypto. That said, I would like to see the current trend remain up. In other words, yes, we're in an intermediate term uptrend. Right here, we had a break above this range, but you can see now we're back below the range right here. And so yes, this thing is an interesting one, and arguably because it's a laggard, if I only had an option to buy XRP or XLM, I would go all in on XRP, even though you might have more earning potential on something like this into a break above that 60-cent range. At the end of the day, it's far less guaranteed. And so unless you're a 100% XLM maxi, maybe you're somewhere in the middle, I would not be buying XLM over XRP. We are in a technical term, intermediate term uptrend. As long as we can hold the lows right here at about, honestly, the current price of like 27 to 28 cents and break for a new high above 33 cents, I would not be touching this thing. In other words, if you're really impatient, buying right now might not be a bad idea, but honestly, I would only buy this thing realistically above that 33.5 cent range. That's where I'd have more confidence that this trend has officially changed. Otherwise, I'm actually looking to buy lower at like 17 cents. Now, looking at HBAR, I actually think it's in a better accumulation range. In other words, it probably didn't perform as well as something like XLM, because XLM is more closely tied in the community minds of XRP holders to XRP. So both trade pretty similarly, although XLM has been getting a lot less attention. HBAR, on the other hand, is closer to that range of support. As you can see, we had our low. In other words, there's probably less buyers and sellers on something like this to begin with for whatever reason, but we had our major low come in around April 7th, a very similar time frame as everything else. But what's so interesting and perfect about this is the fact that that low coincides perfectly with that prior all-time high. And it's not perfect with this high here, but it is almost textbook with these highs right here. Now, it's not, again, I don't typically like just one price. I typically like a range. So anywhere between 12 to 14.5 cents seems to be a pretty strong support. And as you can see here, when we broke out for the first high right here back in November, we played in this range for a while before breaking out for a new all-time, or I should say local high, before coming back down to retest that high as a support. Again, what used to be a resistance becomes a support. However, volume is severely down right now on something like HBAR. And so I like to take that trend line tool again and draw it through these ranges right here. I'm going to go from this double top range. So I'm taking this high right here, going through right here. And as you can see, we're actually in a better range for a new local high in an intermediate term uptrend, well above the trend line. Volume is severely down, but I did like this little explosion of growth in buy volume right here. I think HBAR is a safer bet because if it breaks down from 19 cents, 18 cents, 13 to 14 cents is a pretty good range to accumulate. So you actually have a better risk to reward ratio. And when you actually zoom out, we already touched that prior all-time high going back to March and October of 2021. So again, it touched its prior all-time highs versus something like XLM. You can see that it did touch those all-time highs, but it could potentially break down a little bit further and lower. It has far more trade history on this chart, so it remains to be seen. I think HBAR and XLM, I would trade them very similarly. I like where HBAR is in terms of its price a little bit more, but generally speaking, both of these cryptos have lagged Bitcoin and XRP more. Dogecoin, I think, has room to explode to the upside just based on its sheer volume and mind share in the markets. And so if I were to buy any one of these cryptos aside from Bitcoin, I think XRP and Doge are probably better buys. However, again, if you really like XLM and HBAR, just for looking at the technical analysis side of things, I think accumulating those things either slightly lower or just playing a little bit more cautious in terms of how much money I dump into them would be quite wise. Either way, both XLM and HBAR touched their prior all-time highs, and it's possible we may never go there again, although I believe in a true bull market and in true fashion, these things are going to do really well alongside the rest of the market. Still, volume is tremendously down on both, and so I would like to see them continue to put in those new local highs for an uptrend back into their prior all-time highs for some breakouts. And so that's it for the video, folks. If you enjoyed it, be sure to subscribe to the channel and also check out Altcoin Pro. Again, you have nothing to lose and everything to gain. You can watch this short video to see what we offer. We have one of the highest retention rates in this entire industry, and that's for good reason, because we're consistently on top of the ball providing real value, and our team of researchers and analysts are just so dang good at helping you get what you want out of the crypto market. So thanks so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you on the other side, my friend. Until next time, goodbye.